Couple saved mother penguin injured by barnacles. What happens next will melt your heart. The Antarctic wind howled across the shoreline as Emma Martinez adjusted her thermal binoculars, scanning the rocky beach for any signs of unusual penguin behavior. Her research partner and husband, Jake Thompson, trudged through the snow beside her, his notebook already damp from the constant spray of sea mist. They had been tracking the local penguin colony for months, documenting their feeding patterns and social behaviors, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to discover. "Emma!" Jake's voice cut through the wind. "Over there, by the outcrop." Emma swung her binoculars toward where Jake pointed, her breath catching in her throat. A lone female penguin lay sprawled on the rocks, her normally sleek black and white feathers matted with blood. Even from this distance, they could see the angry red gashes across her body, telltale signs of barnacle injuries, a growing problem they'd been documenting among the local wildlife. "She's still moving," Emma said, already shouldering her medical kit. "But barely." They approached carefully, knowing that even an injured penguin could be dangerous if frightened. But as they drew closer, something about this penguin's behavior struck them as unusual. Instead of trying to shuffle away or showing signs of distress at their approach, she lifted her head weakly, her dark eyes fixing on them with an almost human-like intelligence. "I've never seen anything like this," Jake murmured, kneeling beside the injured bird. "Look at these cuts. The barnacles must have caught her during a storm. But the way she's looking at us." Emma began to clean the wounds, her trained hands gentle but efficient. The penguin remained remarkably still, only occasionally making soft sounds that seemed more like sighs than protests. "She's severely dehydrated," Emma noted, her professional demeanor masking her growing emotional investment in their patient. "These wounds are deep, Jake. She won't survive out here." The decision to take her back to their research station wasn't just about science anymore, it was about compassion. As Jake carefully wrapped the penguin in a thermal blanket, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a routine rescue. There was something in those eyes, something that spoke of an intelligence and trust that transcended the usual barriers between humans and wild animals. Their coastal research station, a modest facility perched on the edge of the continent, became a rehabilitation center for their unexpected guest. They named her Luma, after the way her eyes seemed to glow with an inner light even in her weakened state. Day by day, they cleaned her wounds, administered antibiotics, and helped her regain her strength. What they didn't expect was how Luma would transform their lives in the process. Instead of staying in the makeshift recovery pool they'd set up, she began to follow them around the station like a faithful companion. She would waddle after Emma during her morning coffee routine, watching intently as she prepared their breakfast. During Jake's data entry sessions, Luma would settle beside his chair, occasionally pecking at his shoelaces as if to remind him to take breaks. "You know this isn't normal behavior, right?" Jake said one evening, as they watched Luma attempting to arrange their boots in a neat line by the door. "I've worked with penguins for years, but I've never seen anything like this." Emma nodded, a mixture of joy and concern on her face. "It's like she's trying to communicate something. Did you notice how she always positions herself so she can see both of us at once? And that thing she does with her head when we talk to each other?" The weeks turned into months, and Luma's physical recovery was remarkable. The wounds healed, leaving only faint scars beneath her feathers, but her attachment to them grew stronger. She developed distinct calls for each of them, a soft trill for Emma, a deeper burble for Jake. She would bring them small objects she found around the station, a forgotten pen, a dropped glove, even their keys if they left them out. But they knew the day would come when they would have to let her go. As much as Luma had become part of their lives, she was a wild animal, and they had a responsibility to return her to her natural habitat. The morning they chose to release her was clear and calm, the ocean stretching out before them like a promise. "It's time, girl," Jake said softly, kneeling beside Luma on the beach. She looked at him with those intelligent eyes, then at Emma, who was trying hard to maintain her professional composure. They expected her to rush toward the water, to embrace her freedom with the instinct of a wild animal. Instead, Luma stood at the edge of the surf, looking back at them repeatedly. She took a few steps into the water, then returned to touch her beak to each of their hands in turn. It was almost as if she was saying goodbye. Finally, with one last look that seemed to pierce their souls, Luma entered the water and swam away. Emma and Jake stood on the beach long after she disappeared from view, their hands clasped together, hearts both heavy and full. "Do you think we'll ever see her again?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake squeezed her hand. "I don't know. But something tells me this isn't the end of our story with Luma." That night, as they sat in their suddenly quiet station, they couldn't shake the feeling that they had been part of something extraordinary. What they didn't know was that their adventure with Luma was just beginning, and that their lives were about to become entwined with a mystery that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the connection between humans and animals. They had no way of knowing that Luma would return, or that when she did, she would bring with her the first piece of a puzzle that would change their lives forever. 6 months had passed since Luma's departure. The Antarctic winter had given way to spring, and the coastal waters teemed with life once again. Emma and Jake had thrown themselves back into their research, but their thoughts often drifted to their unusual friend. Every morning, Emma would unconsciously scan the horizon while sipping her coffee, hoping to catch a glimpse of a familiar silhouette among the waves. That particular morning started like any other. They were conducting their regular beach survey, documenting the seasonal changes in the local ecosystem. Emma crouched near the tidal-line, photographing a cluster of newly formed tide pools, while Jake mapped the shifting patterns of the beach erosion. The first hint that something was different came from the sudden change in behavior of the local seabirds. They lifted off en masse, wheeling and calling in an unusual pattern. Jake looked up from his instruments, shielding his eyes against the glare of the morning sun. "Emma!" he called out, his voice tight with disbelief. "Emma, look!" Through the spray of the breaking waves, a lone figure emerged. At first, it appeared to be struggling, its movements jerky and uncertain. Emma's heart leaped into her throat as she recognized the distinctive gait. It was Luma, but something was different about her behavior. The penguin waddled toward them with determination, but instead of her usual direct approach, she stopped every few steps, ducking her head as if checking something she was carrying. As she drew closer, they could see that she was clutching something in her beak, something that glinted dully in the morning light. "Is she bringing us something?" Emma whispered, hardly daring to move. When Luma reached them, she performed a small ritual they had never seen before. She circled them once, twice, then stopped directly in front of their feet. With a deliberate movement, she placed her offering on the sand, a tarnished brass compass, its face clouded with age, but its needle still swaying gently beneath the salt-stained glass. Jake carefully picked up the compass, turning it over in his hands. "This is old," he murmured, his researcher's instincts kicking in. "Really old. Look at the craftsmanship. It's probably from the early 1900s. Emma watched as Luma settled herself on the sand, preening her feathers as if she hadn't just done something extraordinary. "But where did she get it? And why bring it to us?" The compass became the center of their speculation over the next few days. Luma stayed with them, falling back into her old routines as if she had never left, but there was something different about her behavior. She would often stand at the window of their station, staring out to sea with an intensity that seemed almost purposeful. "Maybe she just found it on the seafloor," Jake suggested one evening, as they examined the compass under their research microscope. "Penguins are known to pick up interesting objects sometimes." But Emma wasn't convinced. "Have you noticed how she watches us when we handle it? It's like she's waiting for something, trying to tell us something." The compass itself offered few clues. Its age was evident in the patina of its brass casing, and the intricate engravings around its edge spoke of fine craftsmanship, but any identifying marks had long since been erased by the sea. The only unusual feature was a small etching on the back, a 5-pointed star with what might have been initials at its center, though they were too worn to read. For nearly a week, Luma stayed with them, her presence both comforting and mysterious. She would spend hours watching them work, occasionally making soft vocalizations that seemed almost like attempts at communication. But her attention always returned to the compass, especially when they were studying it. Then, As suddenly as she had appeared, Luma prepared to leave. They recognized the signs, her increased restlessness, her longer gazes toward the ocean. On her last morning with them, she did something unprecedented. She led them down to the beach, stopping at the exact spot where she had first brought them the compass. There, she turned to face the horizon, making a series of calls unlike anything they had heard from her before. "It almost sounds like she's trying to tell us a story," Emma said softly, recording the unusual vocalization on her phone. Jake nodded, the compass heavy in his pocket. "Or giving us directions." As they watched Luma disappear into the waves once again, they were left with more questions than answers. The compass now sat in a place of honor on their desk, its mysterious presence a constant reminder of their extraordinary encounter. "Do you think she'll come back?" Emma asked that evening, as they watched the sun set over the ocean. Jake ran his finger over the worn star etching on the compass. "I think," he said slowly, "that this compass is just the beginning. There's something about the way she brought it to us, the way she watched us examine it. It wasn't random." Emma leaned against him, her mind racing with possibilities. "Whatever it is, she chose us. Of all the people on this coast, she chose us to bring it to." Neither of them could have imagined then just how right they were. The compass was indeed just the beginning, the first piece in a puzzle that would lead them to discoveries beyond their wildest dreams. As they fell asleep that night, the compass's needle swayed gently in its case, pointing not north, but toward the depths where Luma had vanished, as if indicating the direction to mysteries yet to be revealed. As seasons changed and years passed, Luma's visits became a remarkable calendar all their own. Each return brought not just the joy of reunion, but a new artifact that deepened the mystery surrounding their extraordinary friend. Emma and Jake had converted one corner of their research station into what they jokingly called Luma's Museum, though the collection's significance was far from amusing. The antique locket came exactly 1 year after the compass. This time, Luma arrived during a magnificent aurora australis, the southern lights painting the sky in sheets of green and purple. The penguin emerged from the phosphorescent waves like a creature from myth, the silver locket dangling from her beak catching and reflecting the celestial light show above. "It's Victorian," Emma breathed, carefully cleaning decades of salt deposits from the delicate engravings. Inside, they found traces of a daguerreotype photograph, mostly destroyed by seawater, but with one haunting detail intact, the edge of a sailor's uniform. The following year brought the key. Luma seemed stronger, more purposeful in her movements as she presented it to them. The brass key was heavy, its shaft marked with elaborate engravings that had somehow survived years underwater. Most intriguing was the manufacturer's mark. "Charleston Maritime Lock and Safe, 1920. She's not just bringing us random objects anymore," Jake observed, adding the key to their growing collection. "These items, they're all from roughly the same era. They're all connected to maritime history." Emma had created a detailed catalog of each artifact, documenting not just their physical characteristics, but also Luma's behavior when delivering them. "Have you noticed she always arrives at dawn? And always during the first week of spring?" Their research gained a new dimension. Between their regular marine biology work, they began diving deep into maritime history. They consulted with historians, connected with maritime museums, and spent countless hours researching shipping routes from the early 20th century. The fourth year brought the piece of porcelain, a fragment of fine china bearing a partial ship's insignia. The gold leaf was remarkably preserved, protected somehow by the cold Antarctic waters. Emma's careful cleaning revealed an intricate star design that eerily echoed the one on the compass. But it was in the fifth year that everything changed. Luma's arrival that spring was different. She seemed agitated, almost urgent, as she presented them with what appeared to be a simple piece of leather. At first, they thought it might be from an old boot or belt, but as Jake gently cleaned it, his hands began to shake. "Emma," his voice cracked. "Emma, look at this." There, stamped into the leather in fading but still legible letters, was their surname, Thompson. The discovery sent shockwaves through their understanding of Luma's gifts. This wasn't just a random collection of maritime artifacts, this was personal. The leather piece appeared to be part of a luggage tag or perhaps a journal cover, but its presence raised questions that made their heads spin. "This can't be a coincidence," Emma said, watching Jake trace the letters of his family name with trembling fingers. "All these years, these specific objects. Luma's been trying to tell us something." Jake sat heavily in his chair, the leather piece cradled in his hands. "My family, there was a story, something my grandmother used to mention about her father, my grandfather. He was a sailor, but he disappeared at sea when she was very young. She never knew what happened to him." Emma pulled out their collection of artifacts, laying them on the table in chronological order: the compass with its star marking, the locket with the sailor's uniform, the ornate key, the porcelain with the matching star insignia, and now the leather with the Thompson name. "We need to get these analyzed properly," she declared. "Not just for historical dating, we need to know everything about them. Where they might have come from, what ship they might have been on." As they photographed and documented everything yet again, Luma watched from her usual spot by the window. Her behavior had changed too. Instead of her usual relaxed demeanor during visits, she seemed restless, moving between the artifacts and the window, making soft, urgent sounds they had never heard before. "It's like she knows we're finally starting to understand," Emma observed. "Like she's been waiting for this moment." That evening, as they watched Luma prepare for her departure, Jake made a decision. "Next time," he said, his voice firm with resolve, "when she returns, we follow her. Whatever she's trying to show us, wherever these artifacts are coming from, we need to find out." Luma's departure that year was different too. Instead of her usual smooth transition into the waves, she stopped at the water's edge and turned back to them repeatedly, performing an unusual bobbing motion they had never seen before. It almost looked like a nod. As they watched her disappear into the gathering dusk, the weight of the mystery pressed around them like the Antarctic cold. The leather piece with the Thompson name had transformed their wonderful but bizarre experience into something deeply personal, possibly even historic. 5 years, Emma mused, her arm around Jake's waist. 5 artifacts. Each one leading us closer to something, but what? Jake touched the leather piece in his pocket. "Whatever it is, it's connected to my family's past. And somehow, impossibly, Luma knows. She's known all along." That night, sleep eluded them both. The artifacts seemed to glow with possibility in their display corner, each one a piece of a puzzle they were only now beginning to understand. And somewhere out in the vast southern ocean, a remarkable penguin was swimming through the dark waters, perhaps already searching for the next piece of the mystery, a mystery that was about to lead them to a discovery that would change not just their lives, but their understanding of the connection between the past and present, between humans and the remarkable creatures with whom we share this world. The discovery of the Thompson name sparked a feverish investigation. Emma and Jake spent weeks reaching out to maritime historians, archives, and museums, piecing together fragments of information about ships that had sailed these waters in the early 20th century. But it was a late-night phone call to Jake's Aunt Sarah, his grandmother's younger sister, that finally broke the case wide open. "The Morning Star." Sarah's voice crackled over the satellite phone, heavy with decades of unspoken grief. "That was the name of the ship your grandfather was on when it disappeared. I remember the day the telegram came. Mother wouldn't leave her room for weeks." Jake's hands trembled as he wrote down the details. The Morning Star, a merchant vessel, had departed from Charleston Harbor in 1922, bound for Antarctic waters on a specialized trading route. It carried a crew of 23 men, including First Officer Robert Thompson, Jake's grandfather. "He promised to bring me back a penguin feather," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I was only 6, but I remember standing on the dock, watching the ship until it disappeared over the horizon. That was the last time anyone saw them." Emma had already pulled up the maritime records on their research computer. The Morning Star's disappearance had been one of the great mysteries of its time. The ship had made several successful radio contacts during its journey south, but then, somewhere in the waters near their current research station, it had vanished without a trace. "Look at this." Emma pointed to the screen, her voice hushed. "The last known coordinates of the Morning Star, They're less than 50 nautical miles from here, in an area known for its deep underwater canyons. Jake stared at the antique compass, the first gift Luma had brought them. The star engraving. It wasn't just any star. Pulling up historical photos of the morning star, they found the same 5-pointed star prominently displayed on its bow, the shipping company's trademark. All this time, Jake whispered, touching each artifact in their collection. The compass from the navigation deck. The locket, probably belonging to a crew member. The key with the Charleston mark, where the ship originated. The porcelain with the company's star. And now my grandfather's journal cover. Emma wrapped her arms around him as the weight of the revelation settled over them. Luma didn't just find these things by chance. She's been bringing us pieces of the Morning Star's story, piece by piece, year by year. The next few days were a blur of research and emotional discoveries. They contacted marine archaeology experts, sharing their findings about the artifacts. Carbon dating and material analysis confirmed what they already suspected. Every item Luma had brought them came from the same time period, likely from the same vessel. But how? Emma wondered aloud one evening, as they pored over maps of the seafloor. How did Luma know? How did she connect these items to Jake, to his family history? The answer came in an unexpected form. While reviewing their years of footage of Luma's visits, they noticed something they had missed before. Every time she brought an artifact, she would perform the same peculiar head movement, 3 tilts to the left, then 2 to the right. It was identical to the way the Antarctic penguins oriented themselves using the Earth's magnetic field for navigation. She's been trying to tell us the location, Jake realized, his voice filled with awe. Each time she brings something, she's showing us the direction to the source. Using their research vessel's advanced sonar equipment, they mapped the underwater terrain in the area Luma seemed to be indicating. There, in the darkness of an underwater canyon, they found an anomaly, a shape that didn't match the natural formation of the seafloor. The morning they made this discovery, Jake received another call from his Aunt Sarah. Her voice shook as she read from a recently discovered family letter, written by Jake's grandmother shortly before her death. Your grandfather's last radio message, Sarah read, spoke of a storm unlike anything they'd ever seen. But before communication was lost, he said something strange. He said the stars had fallen into the sea, that they were being guided by lights in the deep. We never understood what he meant. Jake thought of the bioluminescent display during one of Luma's visits, how she had emerged from the glowing waves like a creature from another world. In these waters, such phenomena were rare but not unheard of. Had the Morning Star encountered something similar on that fateful night? As they pieced together the historical records with their new discoveries, a story began to emerge. The Morning Star had likely been caught in a severe Antarctic storm, driven off course into treacherous waters. The ship probably went down in the underwater canyon they had discovered, its remains preserved in the cold Antarctic depths for nearly a century. All these years, Jake said, looking out over the waves where Luma had disappeared after her last visit. She's been trying to help us solve a mystery that's haunted my family for generations. Emma squeezed his hand, her scientific mind struggling to reconcile the extraordinary sequence of events that had led them here. Maybe some things can't be explained by our usual methods, she said softly. Maybe sometimes we need to accept that there are forces at work in nature that we don't fully understand. That night, as they prepared for bed, Jake found himself drawn to the collection of artifacts. Each piece now told part of a larger story, not just of a shipwreck, but of connections that transcended time and species, of mysteries that waited decades to be uncovered, and of a remarkable penguin who had somehow bridged the gap between past and present. As he touched the leather journal cover bearing his family name, Jake felt a profound sense of purpose. They were close now, so close to uncovering the full truth of what happened to the Morning Star and its crew. But more than that, they were on the verge of understanding why Luma had chosen them for this extraordinary journey. Outside their window, the Antarctic night was alive with floating ice and shifting seas, and somewhere out there, Luma was swimming through the darkness, perhaps preparing to reveal the final chapters of this remarkable story. The Antarctic spring brought unusually calm seas, as if nature itself was conspiring to help them in their quest. After months of preparation, countless safety checks, and securing special permits for their dive expedition, Emma and Jake were finally ready to explore the underwater canyon where they believed the Morning Star lay hidden. Their research vessel, equipped with state-of-the-art diving equipment, hovered above the coordinates they had calculated from their sonar readings. As they prepared to dive, a familiar shape cut through the waves. Luma had returned, right when they needed her most. "It's like she knows," Emma said, checking her oxygen tanks one final time. "She always knows." This time, Luma's behavior was different. Instead of bringing them an artifact, she circled their boat repeatedly, diving and surfacing in an almost rhythmic pattern. Her movements were precise, deliberate, as if she was demonstrating something. "She wants us to follow her," Jake realized, watching her through his diving mask. "After all these years, she's finally going to show us the way." With their support team monitoring from above, Emma and Jake slipped into the frigid waters. Despite their thermal diving suits, the cold hit them like a physical force. Luma appeared beside them, her sleek form now in her natural element, moving with a grace that made their human movements seem clumsy in comparison. As they descended deeper, the water grew darker, their high-powered lights cutting through the gloom. Luma led them with unwavering certainty, pausing occasionally to ensure they were following. At around 40 meters, she suddenly veered toward what appeared to be a sheer rock face. But it wasn't rock at all. Their lights revealed the weathered hull of a ship, its once proud form now encrusted with decades of marine growth. The five-pointed star on the bow, though dulled by time, was unmistakable. They had found the Morning Star. Luma swam through a gap in the hull, clearly familiar with the wreck's layout. Emma and Jake followed, their hearts pounding despite their years of dive experience. The beam of their lights revealed a scene frozen in time, a dining room with tables still set for a meal never finished, a navigation room with charts still pinned to the walls, and personal belongings scattered about as if their owners had just stepped away. Then Luma did something extraordinary. She led them to what appeared to be the officers' quarters, specifically to a cabin that, according to the ship's plans they had studied, would have belonged to First Officer Robert Thompson. The door was jammed, but decades underwater had weakened the wood enough for them to carefully work it open. Inside, suspended in the endless moment created by the deep, cold waters, they found what Luma had been guiding them to all along. A metal container, sealed against the elements, lay partially hidden beneath a fallen beam. Its design was immediately recognizable, a waterproof document case, standard issue for ship's officers of that era. With trembling hands protected by diving gloves, Jake secured the container, while Emma documented everything with their underwater camera. Luma watched from the doorway, her presence somehow both ordinary and miraculous in this extraordinary moment. Their ascent seemed to take forever, each safety stop an exercise in patience, as the container burned with possibility in Jake's hands. When they finally broke the surface, their support team helped them aboard, their excitement turning to reverent silence when they saw what they had recovered. In the ship's cabin, with Luma watching through a porthole, they carefully opened the waterproof case. Inside, protected from the sea for nearly a century, they found First Officer Robert Thompson's personal journal. The pages, preserved by the case's seal, were filled with neat handwriting that spoke across the decades. Jake's hands shook as he read the first entry aloud. April 15th, 1922. These waters hold secrets beyond our understanding. The lights we saw tonight, moving beneath our ship like fallen stars. The local legends speak of guardian spirits in these waters, souls that guide lost sailors home. I find myself believing them now. As they carefully turned the pages, the journal revealed not just the story of the Morning Star's final voyage, but the personal thoughts and hopes of a man who seemed to sense the extraordinary nature of these waters. The final entry, dated the day before the ship's disappearance, was particularly poignant. To my dear family, if you ever read this, know that my thoughts are with you always. Sarah, my little girl who wanted a penguin feather, I see them swimming beside our ship, like angels in tuxedos. Helen, my love, our star will guide me home. Tears streamed down Jake's face as he read his grandfather's words. Emma held him close, both of them overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Through the porthole, Luma watched them with those intelligent eyes that had always seemed to hold so much more than they could understand. He knew, Jake whispered, touching the pages gently. Somehow, he knew there was something special about these waters, about the creatures that called them home. And now, after all these years, the journal contained more than just personal reflections. There were detailed observations of weather patterns, marine life, and most intriguingly, accounts of unusual phenomena in the waters, bioluminescent displays, unexplained lights, and most remarkably, multiple mentions of penguins that seemed to follow the ship with almost human-like intelligence. As the Antarctic sun began to set, casting golden light across the waves, they realized that Luma had given them far more than just artifacts, or even this precious journal. She had given them a connection to the past, a window into the last days of the Morning Star, and most importantly, she had brought closure to a family mystery that had spanned generations. But as they watched her gliding through the waves beside their boat, they couldn't shake the feeling that even this incredible discovery wasn't the end of their story with Luma. Something in her behavior, in the way she kept watching them with those knowing eyes, suggested that she had one more gift to share, one final piece of the puzzle that would complete this extraordinary tale. The discovery of Robert Thomson's journal changed everything. Emma and Jake shared their findings with the world, carefully documenting how a remarkable penguin had led them to one of maritime history's most intriguing discoveries. The story captured international attention, featured in documentaries and scientific journals alike. But more importantly, it brought peace to generations of the Thomson family who had wondered about their lost sailor's fate. Jake's Aunt Sarah, now in her 80s, wept when they shared the journal's contents with her. "He did think of us," she whispered, touching the pages where her father had mentioned her wish for a penguin feather. "All this time, he was trying to find his way back to us." They preserved the journal in a specially designed case in their research station, alongside the collection of artifacts Luma had brought them over the years. The display became part of a larger exhibition about interspecies connection and maritime history, drawing researchers and visitors from around the world who wanted to learn about the extraordinary bond between humans and this remarkable penguin. As the years passed, Luma's visits became less frequent but no less meaningful. They noticed the subtle signs of aging in their friend, her movements a little slower, her feathers showing touches of gray. Yet her eyes retained that same intelligence, that same mysterious connection that had first drawn them together. Then, on a crystal-clear morning 5 years after the discovery of the Morning Star, Luma made what would be her final visit. She appeared as the sun was rising, the dawn light painting the waves in shades of gold and pink. This time, she carried something that made Emma and Jake's hearts stop, a golden pocket watch, its surface somehow untarnished by the sea. With trembling hands, Jake opened the watch. Inside the cover was an inscription that brought tears to his eyes. "To Robert Thomson, for 20 years of faithful service. May the stars guide you home. The company's retirement gift," he whispered. They must have presented it to him just before that final voyage. But it was what they found inside the watch's mechanism that truly took their breath away. Carefully preserved in a hidden compartment was a small piece of paper, somehow protected from the water all these years. On it, in faded but legible ink, was a message. "To whoever finds this, we are caught in a storm unlike any I've seen. But we are not alone. The creatures of these waters, especially the penguins, seem to be trying to guide us to safety. If we don't make it, know that these remarkable beings tried to help us. And if you're reading this, they succeeded in their mission to tell our story. Robert Thomson, First Officer, Morning Star." As Jake read the note aloud, Luma stood quietly beside them, her presence both ordinary and miraculous. She watched them with those knowing eyes, and for the first time, they truly understood. She wasn't just a penguin who had formed an unusual bond with humans. She was part of something larger, a legacy of connection between species that transcended ordinary understanding. They spent that entire day with Luma, watching as she moved through their station one last time, touching each artifact with her beak as if saying goodbye. As the sun began to set, she led them down to the beach, to the exact spot where they had first found her injured all those years ago. "She's saying goodbye," Emma realized, her voice thick with emotion. Luma approached them one final time, pressing her head against each of their hands in turn. Then she did something she had never done before. She extracted a single feather from her breast and laid it at their feet. Sarah's wish, carried through generations, finally fulfilled. They watched through tears as Luma made her way to the water's edge. There, she turned back one last time, silhouetted against the setting sun. Her call echoed across the waves, not sad, but triumphant, like a symphony reaching its perfect conclusion. As she disappeared into the waves for the final time, Emma and Jake held each other, understanding that they had been part of something extraordinary. Luma had not just helped them solve a historical mystery, she had shown them that the boundaries between species, between past and present, between what we think is possible and what truly is, are far more fluid than we imagine. In the years that followed, they continued their research, but with a new focus. They established the Luma Foundation, dedicated to studying and protecting the remarkable marine life of the Antarctic waters. They never saw Luma again, but her legacy lived on in every piece of research they conducted, every story they shared, and every life they touched. The pocket watch joined the other artifacts in their display, but the feather they kept private, mounted in a simple frame in their home. Beneath it, they placed a plaque with words from Robert Thomson's journal. In these waters, miracles swim in black and white, bearing messages from the deep. They remind us that the greatest mysteries of our world aren't always meant to be solved. Sometimes they're meant to be witnessed, honored, and passed on as tales of wonder for generations to come. And so the story of Luma, the penguin who bridged time and species to reunite a family with their lost history, became legend. In the years to come, other researchers would report unusual behavior among the Antarctic penguins, moments of connection that defied explanation. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the sun painted the waves gold, Emma and Jake would stand on their beach, watching the horizon, knowing that somewhere out there, Luma's legacy swam on in the endless dance of the ocean's mysteries. The feather in their home caught the light each morning, its iridescent sheen a reminder that some bonds transcend time, species, and even death itself. And in the depths of the Antarctic waters, where the morning star still rested in its eternal sleep, the penguins continued their ancient patrol, guardians of secrets that would only be revealed to those with the heart to understand them.